Hello, my name is RT Brown, and I'm the Director of Business Acceleration with the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation. I focus on programs such as Instigate for emerging businesses, Business Acceleration for growth stage businesses, and our Micro Entrepreneur Loan Program for businesses that aren't able to obtain traditional financing. And of course, Regenerate, our program to help businesses navigate ownership succession. Over the last few years, and a collaborator with our Regenerate program is the Vermont Employee Ownership Center. They've been providing leadership, direct technical assistance, and consultation to businesses in the region and across the state who are thinking about different succession models. With me today is Matt Kropp. He's the Executive Director of the Vermont Employee Ownership Center. Matt received his MA in History from UVM in 2011, where he studied economic history and the origins of cooperative finance. He started with VEOC, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, in 2014. Matt, thanks for taking some time to talk with me. This is going to be conversational nature, so we're not going to be terribly formal with this, but why don't we start with you introducing yourself and perhaps providing an overview of VEOC in your own words.
Yep, and thanks for the intro. That was correct. I've been executive director of the organization since October of 2020. Previous to that, I was co-executive director with our founder Don Jameson, and the Employee Ownership Center got it started about 20 years ago in 2001, and kind of officially hired staff and really launched in 2002. So we're, depending on how you look at it, we're at or near our 20th anniversary. We're a nonprofit with a mission to promote and foster broad-based employee ownership for a variety of impact goals, right? Job retention, broad-based opportunities for wealth building among working people, community stability in terms of companies and company succession being done in a way that keeps those companies and communities. And so we do a lot of kind of different things. We're a small team, so we certainly support some groups that try to start businesses that are employee owned from the get-go, but a lot of our work is around ownership succession. And so when a business owner is thinking, okay, what is important for me about what happens next to my business when I'm done with it, whether they're a serial entrepreneur and looking to move on to their next thing, or looking to retirement and have spent 40 years building this business and are looking at what the options are to exit. One of our key activities is oftentimes sitting down for one-on-one conversations with business owners, talk through their goals, their timelines, learn a bit about the business, and see if broad-based employee ownership is something that could be a good fit for both their financial goals, their personal goals, their legacy goals, all of those things you have to consider when you're looking to exit a business. And I should clarify that when we talk about employee ownership, I said broad-based employee ownership, and we define that as forms of ownership where all full-time equivalent employees have a path to becoming a co-owner of the business. So there's lots of examples of things where you might sell to a manager, or sell to a smaller group that become partners, and while those are valid paths, those aren't really what we specialize in. We specialize in these things where everyone from the guy sweeping the floor to the folks in the C-suite can have some stake in the success of the business at an ownership level, not just at a compensation level.
Great. And since your involvement with VEOC, have you seen interest in these different models growing?
Yes. So, when I started, again, we've been around for a while and we have kind of a pipeline. So there's kind of a steady drumbeat. And oftentimes it's a long process of talking to business owners where, a conversation might start and then they get busy and disappear for a few years and then come back up. And there, I think one of the companies when I first started that converted to employee stock ownership plan that year, looking back through the ye grand old spreadsheet, Don, our kind of co-founder, had his first contact with them 10 years prior. So,
oh, wow.
There's definitely some things where it's just kind of keeping in touch, and when folks are ready, they're ready, but it's a big decision. Yeah. More recently, we've definitely been seeing a big uptick where at the start of the pandemic, obviously, along with everything else, things quieted down, way down for the first 6 months. But since then, we've seen in the current year, normally we see, maybe, I think, 2 to 3 businesses convert in a year. This year, in terms of conversions and startups, we're already at 4, and there's a 5th that looks like it's going to flip soon. And and we've got several more that look like it might happen towards the end of the year. So in terms of actual activity, it's higher than usual. And certainly also in terms of inquiries and first contacts, and since probably I'd say since August or September of 2020 was when everything felt like it started to thaw out, and a lot of people had, suddenly these existential questions around, wow, this is what am I doing with my life? What do I want to do with my business?
Right.
Maybe it's a time to, make decisions rather than push them off further. So I think there's been a lot of that. And then the other thing that we have seen is a lot more kind of entrepreneurial activity than normal, both in terms of folks who've worked together and were on unemployment and we're like, hey, we like each other. We think we understand the business. We think we can go into business together.
Right.
But also, people who, are just deciding, hey, I want to start something and I want to kind of have shared ownership from the get-go with a team of other folks.
Right.
So, we're seeing more activity than usual on multiple fronts.
Well, that's great. That's awesome. All right. See that one. Okay. Okay, Matt, our next topic is, from what I understand, it's a new emerging model called an employee ownership trust. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so employee ownership trusts are a model that's been around for a long time in the UK. Probably the most large scale famous example there is as the department store chain that adopted the model in the 1920s is called the John Lewis Partnership. And more recently, it's been kind of translated into American law in the last 5 or 10 years. That really kind of had to do with the possibility had to do with the loosening of laws and like against perpetual trusts, essentially. So trusts that theoretically last forever. And so basically then, I'd say we've been starting to see, there's a few lawyers who've kind of done some really interesting work to try to kind of like make it kind of fit. There's still some things that we'd like to see in terms of like bringing the tax advantages that exist for ESOPs and other things like that to this. So there's not quite as tax efficient yet. But we're seeing some interest, and they're, I think, a very useful tool for certain kinds of business owners, particularly those who are kind of like have strong priorities in kind of legacy and kind of mission preservation over the long term for their business. And so basically what it is you essentially sell the business to what's called a perpetual purpose trust, where the purpose can be a whole variety of things. And there's kind of a concept of steward ownership that's grown up around this idea more generally. But in the employee ownership world, really what we focus on, or the opportunity that we see, is for what we term as an employee ownership trust, where you create a trust where the purpose is to benefit the employees of the company. And it's a fairly flexible model, and is probably like in some ways cheaper to set up than an ESOP. From the kind of legal cost perspectives, because it's not connected to retirement law. The flip side is, because of the way tax law works, you really can only do 100% transaction. Otherwise, things get kind of messy. So it's the sort of thing where you're not going to sell 30% and then 30% later until you get to the 100. You're going to sell all at once. But essentially, what it is you have this trust. It holds the company stock. Generally, you might have the seller would hold the seller's note, and maybe there'd be some outside lending to help kind of finance the creation of this and the sale of the stock to the trust. Yep. The trust would be governed by trustees, could be elected from the employees, could be a kind of a self-perpetuating appointed board of trustees, something along those lines. And then at the end of each year, in addition to the normal profit, the company might make a special bonus of, rather than having profit go into the trust, which would be subject to fairly high taxation at the trust level, would essentially bonus out profitability to employees. So unlike the ESOP, where the employees are kind of building sort of an equity ownership in the company, the employees don't have any sort of ownership of the stock. It's all owned by the trust. And so really what they receive is that sort of additional kind of compensation, profit sharing from this thing. Okay. But it's kind of perpetually owned in this kind of trust way. And so one of the reasons why we see kind of and the type of business owner who's interested in this is that it's probably the strongest form of kind of locking in purpose or mission or certain elements for the company and for the long term. So for an ESOP, it's fairly strong, but there's a certain level of, because it's a retirement plan, fiduciary duty that the trustee has to the plan beneficiaries. So if someone were to come along and offer a company 5 times its valuation because they really like the company, the trustee would be hard pressed to say no to that, because they have this duty to their beneficiaries as potential retirees. Excuse me. The other, and with a worker co-op, it's sort of in between, where it's one member, one vote. But if the employees decide, okay, we got a really sweet deal and we want to sell to this other company, they can still vote to do so.
Yeah.
Whereas with the trust, a business owner who's like, okay, I really want this to remain independent. This company has always supported these particular causes, and I want it to sort of be a supporter of that, or to embed certain values in it. The trust is a very flexible vehicle for kind of embedding those legacy considerations into the long-term ownership architecture of the company. And so it's something where, if you're kind of, you're not going to get things like the 1042 rollover, kind of tax deferral that you'll get from an ESOP. So it's something that's going to be usually less kind of primarily financially driven, although, I think you can, if you're doing the seller financing, you can get paid out over time.
Right.
But for especially for business owners with a strong kind of mission or values component to their goals around ownership succession, it's definitely something worth considering.
Yeah, is it possible once the trust is set up and there's maybe a board to manage that trust, can an acquisition happen, or is that not possible?
It depends on how the trust is set up.
Okay.
Right. So and this is where the flexibility comes in. Whereas an ESOP is the design of it is very governed by the sort of ERISA retirement law that it's embedded within. You can set one of these up for a whole variety of purposes. So you could set it up so that, okay, if we get an offer that's 10 times over, and we'll just bonus out the employees, and then and do that. You could decide if you wanted to do that.
Okay.
You could decide, okay, we're going to always put 10% of the profit is going to be donated to this particular charity. You could do, it's a hugely flexible structure, this kind of perpetual purpose trust. Okay. And so from a business owner perspective, you're going this route is something where you're probably going to be, getting much less in terms of like cash up front for the business. But on the flip side, you have a very sort of wide range of kind of things that you can embed in the long-term ownership structure that will kind of outlast you. And so for things where you're like, okay, maybe it was a family business that, next group of family members doesn't want, but it's very kind of important in the community. This could be a good option, if it's something that just kind of, it's something where the sort of independence of the business is really prized and part of its identity. And that's something that, almost there'd be kind of a sense of loss. If that was lost, it can be a tool for that. So it's really something that when you're thinking about those kind of almost non-financial goals, can be sort of, it's probably like the most kind of coherently powerful tool for ensuring that those are met.
So you mentioned that it's been around for a while, like in the UK, for example. So what's happening that makes it a new model here? Is there?
It's really been a change in American law. So for a long time, there are some almost funny examples. There's a great article if you're interested in digging into this in a magazine called Lapham Quarterly, I think, and the title of the article is "Trust Issues," where there are kind of some abuses of the perpetual trust model, where eccentric millionaires would like donate money to a college, but it would be like a 500 or 1,000-year trust. After which it would be distributed. And actually, Ben Franklin did this with the 100-year and 200-year trust to benefit like mechanics and artisans in the city of Philadelphia, with the idea of being like, the compound interest will mean this is like a much bigger gift a century or two hence, right? Mm-hmm. There's actually a court case in the 50s or 60s where the judge was like, look, with this 1,000-year trust, eventually it'll eat the entire economy if it works like it's supposed to work. So we can't allow these things to exist. They're these ticking time bombs that go beyond the dead hand of someone kind of controls resources long after they're dead. So for a long time in the US, really the only thing that was allowed to have a perpetual trust was cemeteries, for obvious reasons. You you contribute to it in advance, and the proceeds of it like mows the lawn on your grave, right?
Right.
But in recent years, there's been certain modifications and sort of like liberalization of those laws in the U.S. And those laws had been already fairly, liberalized or had never really been locked down as much in the UK. And so that sort of created the opening for this model that was very common in the UK that was based on that that set of trust laws to be possible in the US.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, thank you for that overview of an interesting newish model that seems to be emerging. Well, Matt, thanks so much. I appreciate it. And this closes out our third topic.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me for this conversation. And again, if anyone is interested in getting in touch and talking through the options and or having an introduction to someone at an existing employee-owned company to hear how it works there, we have several on our board who are often happy to have those types of talks. So just shoot me an email, matt@veoc.org.
Thanks so much.